David Ebeltoft, welcome to the Paesanos Podcast. Thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, thanks for having me, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start just by kind of jumping right into where we currently stand with the Writers and Actors Guild. I understand you are currently on strike yourself.
I am on strike. I'm on strike, and I think the Writers Guild, which is the WGA, is what I'll probably use for terminology. So that's the Writers Guild of America. Boy, I think we're into maybe a day 86 of our strike. Mm-hmm. And then we were joined by a sister guild, the Screen Actors Guild, also known as SAG-AFTRA. I think they're about 10 or 12 days in. And yeah, we're on strike just like a lot of other unions are on strike, like UPS recently. Luckily, they got a great outcome for the workers, but the writers and the actors and actresses are on strike because it is tough to make a living wage in this day and age, not just for everyday Americans or people globally, but it's really hard to make a living wage, even in the often how can I say it? I'm a writer, so I want to edit myself, but the often like mistermed dreamlike, extremely expensive, everybody has a pool in their backyard studio system, which is Hollywood. But most of Hollywood, man, it's just a bunch of workers. 99% of us are sort of, for a better term, lack of a better term, sort of blue collar workers. The 1%, the ones that you and I know about, Sean, the Brad Pitts and the Steven Spielbergs and the Julia Roberts and, Channing Tatums and all these wonderful individuals, they're that 1% that make tons and tons of money. But for the rest of us, we have to really sort of fight for our paycheck. And both of our guilds are on strike because, man, that paycheck just keeps on dwindling, unfortunately.
Yeah, and all the articles like to remind us that the last time both unions were on strike at the same time, Marilyn Monroe was acting and in movies, and it's, I think, a pretty strong indication that we're at a big turning point in terms of film and television and the industry as a whole. And so I want to start by kind of maybe backing up a little bit and understanding how we got here, how the industry has changed over the past, 15 or 20 years, from the just simply the big screen to the small screen to cable and all the way to streaming and where we're at today.
Yeah. And yeah, we'll rewind everybody. We'll flash back to the way we used to watch movies is drastically different than the way we watch now. And those 15, 20 years that you're talking about, there's so much to unpack, right? You mentioned that transition from more of a theatrical going audience to really us being way more at home. We have the rise of streaming, which we're now in that sort of golden age of streaming where there's almost too many streamers. We have the complete decimation of VHS and DVD rentals. Physical media is gone. It's really being pushed, buying a Blu-ray or buying a DVD is almost like buying a vinyl now. It's very, very, very much of a niche market. We have internet fandom. We have connectivity between audience and studios and audience and stars more than we ever had before. Unfortunately, that also brings up a lot of toxic fandom, which is unfortunate. We also have the unfortunately short time spans and attention spans of audience members, and how our attention span is being spread out over multiple platforms, where before we used to just have the theater. We used to just have that sort of one big church, that palace to see everything we could see. So we have so much going on in the past 15, 20 years. But I think the thing that I'd really like to discuss with you today, and it really sort of ties into what you were sort of talking about going from the big screen to the small screen, is really how we as audience members are viewing stuff drastically different and hence paying for it drastically differently. And then that trickles down to working writers like myself, working directors, actors and actresses. So do you, Sean, remember a film in your youth that you used to love to watch over and over?
Absolutely. And if I did, it was on VHS, and I remember the timestamps of some of my favorite scenes so that I could fast forward or rewind to get there quickly. But yeah, of course.
Yeah. And mine, I remember the specific title, and I'm glad that you mentioned rewatching it on VHS all the time, is that my brother and I made our parents rent The Never-Ending Story.
I was going to say The Never-Ending Story, David. That is crazy. That's the example I was going to use, and
that's amazing.
One of the most recent DVDs that I received as a gift, because it's been years now since, was my mom buying that for me on DVD to make sure that I had an updated copy of it. So that's really funny.
That's amazing. Yeah. Our brains are in sync. Well, first of all, bless your mother, because she bought physical media, which is really rare nowadays, right? But so I'm so happy that you're on the same watching page as not only myself, but also my brother. So let's take Never-Ending Story as an example on how audiences really used to digest that. So first of all, you and I, we would go to the theater, right? Let's just say your mom and your dad and siblings go. So like my family was a family of 4. So family of 4, we go to the theater, we see that. Let's sort of say that's $40. We're just going to start tallying up the numbers here. And then we're going to break down how much those numbers just diminished over the past 20 years. Yeah. So we have $40 in the theater. Then you and I, we rent the living heck out of that VHS. And we remember where poor Atreyu, loses the horse, and all these horrible, horrible things. The Nothing, which is the most metaphysical. I mean, that was teaching us as kids we're still trying to process.
Right. That's right.
But so that's like $2 a night, right? But you and I, man, we needed that for at least five weekends in a row.
Right.
So that's $10. So we're now up to 50. Well, maybe your mother also really knew that you loved it, so she purchased it on VHS for you. So that was probably $20, $30. So right now we're up to about $80. But then it would get to broadcast television, which, it would run on HBO or Showtime at first, those pay-per-view channels in a way. Then it would come to what you and I probably watched it on over and over, TBS, USA Network, ACM or AMC, Turner Classic Movies. So while it's not a 1-to-1 dollar correlation, you and I racked up as a family, one viewership family, about $90 on one film. That's the traditional model. And that's how studios made their money. And then that's how it actually trickled down to us as writers. When streaming came along, that was just decimated. I mean, streaming, for all of its benefits as a viewer, because I am not anti-streaming. I'm a huge, I consume content a lot. But streaming really just took a huge hand grenade to that whole dollar-to-dollar system. Because when streaming came along, they're like, we're going to give you guys $10 a month, or you guys are going to give us $10 a month, and we're going to let you view 1,000 films for as many times as you want. So streaming basically took what one American family would spend, $90 on one film. That same American family now spends $10 for 1,000 films. And how that affects us as writers, and why the Writers Guild is specifically one of the big reasons we're on strike, is that when the hand grenade was thrown and that dollar-to-dollar conversion went away, we lost what's called residuals. And residuals really are sort of the lifeblood of the creative film industry. They are sort of a piece of the pie that writers, actors, actresses, and directors get of the profits of a certain film. And the reason why we get that is because we're the creative forces behind it. You can't have a great film without a great script. You can't have a great film without a great director. Can't have a great film without great actors and actresses, and so on. So for the most part, writers used to make about 1%, give or take. I mean, it's not that simple of a conversion, but for our talk, it's about 1% of that profit. So those $90 that you and I spent on, well, really our parents spent, let's be honest. Right. Those $90 that our parents spent on Never-Ending Story, that writer would get about $1 off of what? One family viewing it. So the Neverending Story was huge. And even if we said 60,000 American families sort of did the exact same thing as ours, that's about $60,000 that would trickle down to the writer. And why that's extremely important is that the film industry is so competitive, and it's really one of the most expensive art forms out there. And I'm not, poo-pooing other art forms at all, but it takes a lot of capital to create a film.
Yeah.
And the reason why we as writers and we as directors, actors, actresses need those residuals is because it's really rare to sell films constantly or be involved in films constantly. So on a good year, I would sell one film. But really it's every 2 or 3 years. So how residuals works is they would bridge the gap between us selling films and making money. I like to equate it as to sort of a waiter or a waitress. A waiter or a waitress gets base pay, and then they get tips. Writers work the same way. We get a base pay, which is fine. It's not astronomically amazing like what people think, Brad Pitt makes and whatnot. We get a good working salary, and then the residuals help us feed our family, feed ourselves, roof over our heads during those 2 or 3 years that we don't make any money. So when streaming came along and decimated that $90 down to $10 to view 1,000 films, it completely decimated residuals. And it's a huge reason why not only the writers are on strike, but the actors and actresses are on strike as well. SAG-AFTRA's on strike because we now most of us are struggling to really make a great living, not even great, a decent living off of things that are ridiculously successful, because streamers will not pay any residuals because they believe, and they keep all of their numbers very, very tight, but they don't share in the success of a television series or of a film like the studios used to share in the success back in the day with films like The Neverending Story.
That's really interesting. And so, the big player that in streaming that we often hear about is Netflix, and even their own model went from the physical copies that you'd receive in the mail to that monthly streaming model. And yeah, they're notorious for not sharing that data. And these are things that I'm just realizing as you're talking are connected to some of the issues. And your work is on a variety of different platforms right now, from free viewings on places like YouTube or Vimeo to, Hulu or Amazon Prime. And do they all kind of work, other than the free models, do they all work the same? Are they all pretty similar to Netflix, or is Netflix kind of like the big bad wolf that we think of it as when these conversations happen? Are they sort of leading the way?
I think you're right. I think they are. I do believe, and again, as a consumer, as an audience member, I watch Netflix like crazy. I'm not anti-streaming. I'm not anti-Netflix or Amazon. I think the industry shifted so quickly, and I don't think the industry expected our viewership to shift as quickly with it, right? When streaming came about, and I mean, Netflix just cut their DVD mail service. They actually kept it going until I think this year, because some holdouts were still very, very interested in that. But for the most part, once they started streaming, we adapted so fast because we were able to consume content without a schedule. We didn't have to worry about a broadcast schedule. We didn't have to go down to the video store. I mean, all the things that we now take for granted. I can't believe how fast I shifted as well. I remember, getting my first smart TV with the ability to do Netflix. I think it was in the late 2009s, 10s. It was pretty early on. And within 6 months, I remember I didn't go to the video store anymore. I barely went out. I mean, even myself, somebody who really does love to support cinema in all of its ways and varieties, I adapted very quickly, so quickly that I had to step back and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. wait, don't forget that there's good process here, and there's great reasons to go to the theater, and there's
Yeah.
great reasons to, possibly peruse this mom and pop video store and look at the cover and then read the back cover. Simple things. But I do think
Yeah.
you're right that the big bad wolves are Netflix, Amazon, Apple, Hulu, and Disney for sure. But Hulu and Disney, they sort of came a little bit. Hulu was first in the game alongside Netflix and Amazon. Disney came a little bit later, which is sort of during that time, which is called the streaming wars, which we're still sort of in, where all of a sudden everybody wanted to become a streamer. Because how it used to work, and I'm sure you remember, is it used to work like all of the studios would license their films to Netflix. So you could watch a Disney on Netflix very easily. But then all these companies started to realize, oh my God, we're not making as much money as we can out of this. Let's start our own streamer. And now I'm sure you and most of the folks listening believe there's way too many streamers, which I agree with. There's so much out there. And I think what we're going to see going forward over the next few years is they're going to start to shrink. They're going to start to combine. They're going to start to really become more back to those big five, which would be Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Disney. They're going to sort of merge in the next few months here. Now it's Max, used to be HBO Max, Peacock, some of the really big ones. Now, the other platforms you're talking about, which in the industry we call them AVOD, which is advertising video on demand. And those are the free platforms that every 20 minutes you and I have to watch an ad, which really is how we used to watch films on television anyway.
Right.
Those streaming platforms are actually quite beneficial to a lot of films because you see a $1 correlation. Each time you watch a film, if you want to watch The Neverending Story on one of these free platforms like Tubi or Vudu, are two of the big ones. Each time that's watched, those ads are played, and then the films get a percentage of those ads. So it's a little bit actually better correlation to making money because there's advertising money to then split up. And if your film's not viewed, you don't make it.
Yeah, I wondered about that because I'm thinking, there are still different ways that I pay for content. And on sites like Tubi or even YouTube, I'm not paying, but I know that I have to sit through an ad or two or more if it's a longer feature. And those go to the creators. I mean, that ad revenue, a big chunk of it goes to the creators. When it's ad free and a subscription based like Netflix, I'm understanding that there's not as much. But I've also rented and purchased movies through iTunes, where you pay one price for either a television series or a specific movie, and that price is anywhere from $8 to $15 or so for the one piece of content. Does that affect the way you get paid once whether it's residuals or right up front? Do those different payment models affect trickle down to the writers and actors?
They should, but
sure,
unfortunately, the rental system, and thank you for renting, because that's a big issue, is a lot of people nowadays, and I'm sure you've heard people in your day-to-day life say, oh, don't worry, I'll wait till it comes on Netflix. Just like we were talking about how that viewership really, really shifted from theater to VHS to, purchase to broadcast. Now it's really shifted to, okay, I'm excited about it and I'll see it in the theater, or I'll wait for it for my monthly subscription price. And a lot of people skip that middle step that you and I both do. I love to rent films because I don't want to wait all the time. But for the most part, those film rentals would trickle down to residuals. So when you as a consumer spend that $3.99 of a film that's been out for a year, or sometimes $19.99 if it was just released or is still in theater, that's a dollar-to-dollar conversion that is still covered in the WGA contracts, which is great because the last time the WGA sort of negotiated these contracts, that rental fee was still part of it. And the residuals are calculated off of that. So each time you do rent, that should trickle down to the writer. But the stuff that almost all of us wait for, unfortunately, Netflix and those monthly Amazon Prime, those monthly things, there's no trickling down. And that's where I don't know the percentage. I'm just going to say probably 75% plus wait to do it, to watch a film during that time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And now, so here we are. This, we just described how we got here. For people who are not familiar with your work specifically, I thought this was a good place to sort of interject maybe how your brain works a little bit. I don't know how deep we want to go into that conversation because you put some pretty suspenseful, dramatic, often terrifying work out there. And I think it's terrifying because it sort of preys upon the fear that we all hold inside of us, or some of the images that we might see in our own nightmares, as opposed to totally made up science fiction, out of nowhere, which has a place too. And I know you're working on a comic series as well, but
yeah.
So I say all that to say, in your very interesting mind, what does the future look like if things work out as favorably as they can for the writers in this process and coming out of it?
Right. Well, thank you for those kind words. I really hope my fears aren't implanted too much in your noggin. And that
no, they were already there, but you just draw them out every time I watch.
I hope. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I hope they can dissipate with a round of golf, a good beer, and don't watch Neverending Story. Let's shift to maybe watching like Uncle Buck, John Candy's.
That's right. Yeah,
classic comedy. Yeah, it's funny. I broadly speaking, with the Writers Guild strike and the Screen Actors Guild strike, I'm pretty optimistic. I'm a pretty optimistic, friendly fellow. I truly get my demons and fears out on the page, which is why all of my films are, they're dark and they're gritty and they're usually quite depressing. But yeah, and that is a wonderfully therapeutic and cathartic way to write. And I do love audiences, and I watch a lot of those films too. I love that audiences sometimes don't want to be happy. They don't want to be cheery. We saw during the pandemic and during COVID, we saw tons of pandemic and COVID related films being watched more than the ones I thought people would watch, which is like Uncle Buck. I thought that would be binged like crazy, but no, things like Contagion were being binged like crazy, and tons of zombie films. So sometimes, like, our escapism, we want to see how great our world is by then comparing it to something similar, and we're like, oh, thank God, at least nobody's eating our brains yet.
Exactly.
Yeah. But okay, I hope this situation plays out. Oh man, that's a tough one. I mean, I really hope that we're heard. That's our biggest thing, because right now we are the ones creating in and sacrificing for this medium. That we're basically asking for monetary compensation, and we're asking to make sure that AI doesn't come and really artificial intelligence doesn't come and completely decimate our careers. And it sort of stinks because we're not being heard by the ones that really, they're the ones that pay the bills, right? And they're the ones that are saying, hey, we rely on writers, we rely on actors and actresses, we rely on these people. You guys are familial collaborators, but they're also stiff-arming us in terms of basic human needs, like a living wage, and to make sure that Skynet doesn't just ruin everything. So I feel like currently the strike is really about being heard and ensuring that we actually get back to the table. But the ones that need to invite us back are the studios. And unfortunately, I think that disconnect will happen probably until the fall. I think that the studios will deal with the Screen Actors Guild first, because the Screen Actors Guild is very big. I think they have something like 160,000 members. And right now, actors and actresses have halted production to a complete standstill. So the studios will deal with them first, and then they'll get to the Writers Guild. And the Writers Guild will probably have a little bit of benefit within that, because they'll be able to see what the Screen Actor Guild got in terms of their residuals and in terms of their requests, and they'll be able to sort of piggyback a little bit off of that. But what writers are asking for and what actors and actresses are asking for are totally different. And so I think that even though we do have at least a few more months of this, which is unfortunate, I think what you guys as an audience will see coming out of this is you guys are going to see a lot more reality programming coming in the fall, which is unfortunate. There are a few things that we're able to squeak by in production, but the studios actually did what they called a strike-proof plan, which they've actually had in work. They've had it in the in the cogs and in the wheels of the machine for the longest time, and they unleashed it recently. So I think audience-wise, we're going to see a lot more reality programming, and I think we're going to see a lot more sort of relicenses of classic properties, like the two we've already talked about today, Uncle Buck, Never Ending Story. I think we're going to see a lot more just sort of regurgitation of great films that you and I have already seen, but the studios and the streamers are just going to put back up to their top to make it look like they're circling back in content. I think once we get out of this, there's unfortunately going to be some writers, there's going to be some actors and actresses, there's going to be some casualties, which is unfortunate because we're already close to the 100-day mark, which is almost as long as the 2007-2008 writers' strike. That was one of the longest. And it'll probably go 100 days more. And a lot of writers just won't be able to support themselves anymore with their writing because nobody's buying. And it's already ridiculously competitive to begin with. So it's going to be extremely unfortunate that some will have to go and seek other employment. Same with actors and actresses. So I think that's going to be really sad. And that's probably where my dark and gritty and depressing writer sort of comes in. But, for the most part, the film and television industry, we will continue to rock on. We will continue to create and write great films for worldwide enjoyment. I mean, I do feel like right now we're going to have to suffer a little bit, and some of the audience is going to have to suffer a little bit. But I do think in the end, it will be able to hopefully reset the industry that makes sure that we should really, as a collective culture, not just within the studio system, really not only support, but also champion a lot of the creators that are at the very, very front of the process. I love cheering for Oppenheimer and Barbie and these huge names attached for it. Those two films right now, it's really great that they're doing really, really well. But there's, 5,000 other films sort of quote unquote beneath their budget level and their marketing level that also need champion. And the creators behind that really need champion. So my optimism sort of says like, hey, it'd be cool if we're able to press a reset button after these strikes to sort of go back to a more, and this is very, very optimistic of me, but more utopian idea of how we view films and then how we talk about the creators, like the writers and the directors and the actors and actresses behind them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, there's some pretty not so distant memories of a time when we were all stuck in our homes and just trying to watch and consume whatever we could. And at that time, some production halted as well for totally different reasons. But, I think every time this happens, there's this sort of reminder that even though I might have a guilty pleasure in watching something like Love is Blind, which there it is. Now it's recorded. I've said it into a microphone.
It's a good film. It's a good film.
But if that was the only thing that I had to watch, boy, that would not be good. And I think, one of my hopes is that we collectively understand the impact that this artistic medium has on our lives and how important it is, not only for distractions, but for opportunities for storytelling. The one example that you just shared about Barbie, for example, the conversations that are happening around that movie are so much bigger than the movie itself, than the script or the actors or whatever goes into it. And that's what we're losing. That's what we're missing when people like you are not getting paid, when we're missing the stories that are important for having the conversations that we need to have as a society, or even just around the dinner table, or just the entertainment that we have as families, as friends. There's a real big piece missing, and God bless the streaming industry that brought that front and center and gave us that opportunity to access it so much more easily. But to not bring you along, to not bring the actors along with them and with that success is a travesty. And I hate to see that this is how it needs to happen, but I'm glad that it's happening so that we at least have the potential for that utopian future that you just described.
I think, yeah, thank you for those words. And I think you're totally right. The streamers, and again, they're not evil. They do some evil things but for the most part. They have brought, what I used to have to fight for. I used to have to fight to see foreign cinema. I used to have to fight to see indie cinema. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, and our local college library was the oasis for any film, that wasn't a huge blockbuster. But we had to you had to reserve these tapes way in advance. So I could keep on going on and on about sort of how streaming has affected us for the good, but man, we are having those global conversations. I'm able to see amazing, films from Vietnam and, from, Argentina that open up my eyes and open up my empathy because I'm experiencing it through the silver screen, right? Yeah. It is truly storytelling, and the film medium is truly that amazing campfire that we would all sit around and we'd all tell these awesome stories. But now that campfire is super big and global, and it's just a iPad screen or your television screen. That's the glow that's flickering on our faces right now. So, and streaming did do a great job, and they still do a great job of bringing those stories to our homes and our hearts very, very easily. I think where they have tripped up and where we're trying to, fight for a good paycheck. We still want to work with them. We still want to share our stories. They have hundreds and hundreds of amazing executives that also want to champion writers' stories and directors' stories and actors and actresses' visions and voices. But I think what happened is that they started their medium without worrying about residuals, and they haven't had to worry about it until now. So if I was to play devil's advocate and all of a sudden they're like, whoa, we can't switch the way we operate. Like, this is how we operate. This is how we make money. Now you guys are asking us to go to a system that you should have asked us to implement 10 years ago. I can see that, and I can see their struggle, but at the same time, they can't keep shortchanging. There was a great article about, I haven't seen the show yet. My wife watches it. The Bear. Have you seen The Bear yet? That chef
I'm
show?
about halfway through this most recent season. Yeah, it's great.
Okay. Yeah, my wife says it's amazing. And, for an example, because I haven't gotten into television at all during this because I'm not a television writer, but, most of the Writers Guild is made up of television writers. And when streamers wanted to compete in those streaming wars, so many more programs are being made, so many more shows are being made. Well, that's really good for writers because we get hired more. But with more shows, that means less budget for each show. So a lot of those amazing shows like The Bear, man, their budgets got so packed and stripped down that one of the writers was paid $40,000 for a script on that show, no residuals. So he's not able to share in the success of this show that's a worldwide phenomenon, nominated for Emmys, and he got $40,000 as a not a base, but that's the base pay, not his take home. His take home is then obviously taxes, like all of us Americans, or at least good Americans, pay. And then also within the industry system, you pay your agent and your manager, which usually equals about 20%. So I'm pretty sure that writer's take home for an extremely successful television show is $20,000 for the year. And that, I think, is below poverty. So, that's sort of where the streamers really need to step up and say, thank you for creating The Bear and for creating this amazing series. We will let you share in its success because we are definitely feeling its success as a studio. It would be nice. to let the writer and the actor and the actress and the director share in that as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let's talk about your work a little bit for a moment. I know that you have a film in the can now. It premiered at Tribeca. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And one of the pieces of good news for us as viewers and listeners is that while there's a lull in fall and maybe early winter, we'll get to see that. I believe you said you're anticipating it'll be more widely available in January. So can you talk a little bit about Blood for Dust and what you're excited about with this project?
Oh, and I probably should have mentioned this prior, but due to my guild rules, I'm not allowed to talk about my films.
Okay.
It is I know, I feel bad, Sean. I should have let you know that prior. But I'll explain the rule really fast and how it's also really affecting. You can talk about it. So what you just said, that's great. Everybody listen to what Sean said and take note. But part of both guilds, part of the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild, is that we shouldn't promote our own material during a strike, because even though our promotion, especially for a writer of my stature, I'm not a big name, I'm not an industry name, but any promotion we do for a film can get $1 for that studio. So we are restricted from doing any promotion. So I although our film did premiere at Tribeca, and stereotypically I would be able to do the press there, and I'd be able to walk the red carpet and have pictures taken of me and, all that fun stuff that doesn't happen too often. When the writers went on strike, I was unable to do that. And what you're seeing right now, I think it happened with Oppenheimer, is that they did the red carpet, but then once the Screen Actors Guild called a strike, they all walked out of the film. And it's just to sort of show solidarity and to ensure that, hey, studios, we provide more services than just our writing, because studios will require writers, directors, actors, and actresses to promote a film. And a lot of times that's baked into our contracts. Like, hey, you need to do this promotion, you need to tweet about it, you need to do this about it. So when we went on strike, we fully strike. And the reason why it's so, I think it's great that the Screen Actors Guild joined us, because it shows how important our message as the Writers Guild is and how important these issues are. But I think they have way more clout in that realm. So what you're seeing in the trades right now and what might be trickling down to an everyday audience is, oh my God, this huge film is going to play at this huge film festival, the Toronto International Film Festival, but the actors and actresses won't be there to promote. How's that going to affect the film? So yeah, I apologize for throwing a wrench in your very kind question, but that's one of the things that we have to do on the strike.
No, and I appreciate that explanation. I don't know that I would normally leave it in if I really stepped in it during an interview, but
No.
But I think that's important to hear. I think it's important to leave that in and for people to understand that helps me understand, that the studios are leaning on the writers and actors even after their job is done with all the promotions, because you can't put a studio exec on the red carpet and expect the same kind of promotion of the movie. That's not how it works. So that really drives the point home that the writers, the actors are helping it all along with the success and not seeing any of the residuals along the way. So that really brings it home. I appreciate that.
And 100%. I'm glad you asked the question. And also, we don't get paid for promotion. So a lot of times we're required to continue on with the film in terms to help that film achieve more financial success. And a lot of times, historically, writers, directors, actors, actresses would do that because the more they promote it, the more they'll see those residuals. Like, guess what? With those residuals decimated. So right now, it is sort of like a free service that's provided. And I know some of the big guys and gals, the huge names that we know of. Yeah, I'm sure they have great things in their contract and their clauses that say this is how much we'll do and this is how much we'll make for our promotion. But for most of us, we do it because we love it and we want people to see our films, And so So yeah, it is hard to pull back because, as a creator, you want to talk about what you're excited about. And you just want you genuinely want to have those conversations that you were talking about that we should have over the dinner table. So it is tough to put the old gag order on oneself
Yeah,
during
yeah.
this time. But yeah, for a good cause.
No, totally. And I know one of the real contentious points that we've arrived at as a film industry is this conversation around artificial intelligence, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier, and that's certainly part of the reason for these negotiations is because nobody really knows or understands where artificial intelligence is going, and who's to say that in the next year I can't open up ChatGPT and say, "Hey, write a movie in the style of David Ebeltoft," and see what it spits out. And of course, who's to say that Netflix can't do something like that in the future either? So, what are your thoughts on artificial intelligence and how it affects your work or potentially draws from your work, more eerily as we move forward?
Yeah, and you're hitting the two big ones. The effect on work and how AI draws from my work. I think, my disclaimer, I'm not anti-technology and I'm not anti-AI. AI is a tool, right? And when used properly, it can really benefit many professions. Just because we have been talking about writing and because I am a writer, I rely heavily on AI to fix my grammar and my misspelling.
Yeah.
A lot of the screenwriting programs have AI that help find gaps within our screenplay due to human error, aka my error. So when I hit the return key a few too many times, that can actually translate to more dollars being spent if I don't catch that. And AI is like, yo, David, you made a mistake. You should delete these 2 extra returns. Research, my God, AI is so pivotal in helping sift through the endless amounts of the internet to make sure that I know how to poison somebody within my script properly.
Yeah.
Don't look in my search history, please. But it's a technology that you just said, you hit the nail on the head for sure. It's moved so fast and it's developed so quickly where I think where it gets really, really scary is when it's not used as a tool, right? When the tool becomes a threat. And our whole conversation so far has really been about corporate America. I mean, Hollywood, for its dreamlike stature and its palm trees and for its glitz and glamour, is an industry, and they answer to Wall Street. So it's a massive industry that has a track record of saving money. And a lot of times, what we're seeing right now is that we see that tool, AI, just like you said, Chat GPT, if you're looking at it through the massive troves of Hollywood number and data crunchers, and they see an Excel spreadsheet cell that says, David, screenwriter, costs, let's just say $80,000, Chat GPT and a few prompts costs $0, that's where it can get really, really scary. And we're starting to see it a little bit within the art world, within the digital space, within animation space in particular. I'm sure you see it in the marketing and media space as well. I have friends that work in the graphic design business that their clients that used to say, please create a proposal, are now sending them proposals created by AI. And then the human graphic designer just puts polishes on it. So they're 20 hours per project is now cut down to 2 hours per project because AI took large parts of the, so that's what we're worried about in terms of writing. Now, AI, I don't think will ever replace creativity and vision and heart and human empathy. And I don't believe that it will ever get good enough to replace that. But we're talking about corporate America again, right? And I like to think about the company Hershey's, which, Sean, you and I live in the same area. We live pretty close to Hershey, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Hershey's, a chocolate company, is notorious for removing enough of their chocolate, enough of their cocoa butter from their chocolate to save a dime. even though they're a chocolate company. So when
Yeah.
that's the mentality that we as writers have to worry about. When Hershey's is saying that's okay, we will know it's okay if we don't have to be legally called milk chocolate anymore. People will melt it in between a marshmallow roasted on a fire and 2 graham crackers, and nobody will care if it's a bunch of chemicals or real cocoa butter. But that's the way the film industry thinks as well, unfortunately. And that's what we're worried about. Is we're worried about, you know, those machines not doing a great human empathetic creative job. We're worried about people being like, it's good enough, let's get that script out there, let's get into production, most of the world won't care. So that's sort of the first worry is monetary, for sure. And
oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go. I was going to go into the second worry, which was really that sort of training model. If so, do you want to go?
No,
or should
please.
I?
Continue.
So that second worry is what you said is really how AI is being trained. And I'm not the tech expert, but really what I do know is that they're being trained on massive amounts of published material. Now that published material, a lot of scripts, you know, mine are out there in the world online. A lot of times I don't put them online myself, but they just happen to get out there. But I do have copyrights, or the companies that hired me have the copyrights to those scripts. But AI is able to sift through copyrighted material and train itself in such a fast way that it's not like a college student reading my script for educational purposes. It's really being, ripped through and baked, and all of the months, and sometimes let's not even talk about the years of experience that I needed to get to that point of creating a script that then took a few months. They're able to rip through that and kick out parts of my work, parts of what I would do if you said, hey, let's make sure that this is a David Ebeltoft script in your prompt. Then that is basically a plagiarism machine in a weird way. And the developers of these models, ChatGPT is the big one, they claim fair use. I'd love to hear a Paesanos podcast about fair use and what is truly fair about it and what's unfair about it. But that's what really raises the alarms, is that they're using so much of our published material and our literary material as source material, and we are not being compensated by it to then have a robot possibly kick out something that we actually did. But also, they aren't able to copyright whatever AI kicks out. So it's a very, very swampy, weird world right now. But the way it's being trained is off of our hard work, our sweat, our tears. And it stinks to think about that then replacing us at the same time.
Yeah,
so.
Right. And I'm in website design, and if there's a particular page that I don't want Google to crawl, I just throw a little snippet of code on there, or in some cases even flip a switch, and that tells the search bots, hey, don't index this page. You would think there's something just as easily that could be coded into copywritten work when it comes to artificial intelligence, like, hey, you're not allowed to crawl this page. And it's amazing that we aren't there yet, because I'm sure there are lots of people who thought about these things and want to say, oops, I didn't think about that, later. But there's some easy answers. There's some very complex and difficult answers. And I hope and I understand that that's what everyone is trying to sort out with these conversations and negotiations.
Yeah. And that's interesting. I haven't even heard of, the industry taking those steps to protect that copyrighted material. Is it happening? I sure hope so. I think what happens is that just because, like the Academy, the folks that run the Oscars, the Academy asks for every script that goes into, that releases in a year, they request the script from the writer for their library that is used by universities worldwide. So when I have a film release, the Academy of Motion Pictures and Sciences, they email me and they're like, hey, David, can you please share us with the script? We'll upload it to our secure database. Well, that secure database is uploaded, but then it's downloaded by all these other sites that just want to make those available. So those sites, it's going to be an interesting policing problem, I think,
Yeah.
which, as we know, the internet has a lot of trouble being
Oh, yeah.
policed. Or so even with great ideas like that, it's going to be interesting to see. And it's really going to be interesting to see if AI pulls an amazing line, you know, Luke, you are my father.
Mm-hmm.
If you pull that amazing line from a script, George Lucas, then if that comes up in another film, is that now copyrighted? Like, what is but it has nothing to do with, Darth Vader and Star Wars and Tatooine and arms being cut off and, all this fun stuff with the Force. If you remove all that, is it still copyrighted? Probably not. Definitely not an expert. But it's going to be really interesting over the next few years to see how this pans out. And I think the Writers Guild is really just trying to get ahead of it, because we didn't get, even though I wasn't in the guild at the time, we didn't get ahead of streaming, and we didn't get ahead of residuals because we just didn't see it moving that fast. We didn't see the internet speeds getting so fast where we could literally download and watch films in minutes. And because we didn't react fast enough there, we're behind the 8 ball. And I think with AI, some writers are really hoping that it's sort of like Bitcoin or Ethereum or some of these other sort of fads. And I'm not offending all the other, financial Bitcoin investors here, but within film, they really thought Bitcoin was going to fully finance films nowadays. That didn't pan out. Some people are really hoping for that, but I think the guild is really just trying to get ahead of the curve so it doesn't burn us down the road if it happens.
Yeah, and Godspeed to anyone who's trying to get ahead of technology and understand the role it's going to play.
Oh my God, you're right.
But I appreciate, the opportunity to talk with you about it. As with all of the episodes of this podcast so far, this is just a tiny little piece of what is happening across the internet, what's happening as a result of the internet. And it's been really interesting talking with you about how we got here and where we're going in this little tiny snippet of time while the strike is happening. And so I appreciate your time, and I wish you the best of luck in terms of, that utopian future that we're both picturing.
Nice. Thanks, John. It's been fun, and thanks for the kind words and support. Really appreciate it. Now let's all go watch Uncle Buck, Never Ending Story.
100%. Yes, I plan on it.
Okay, good.